I'm joined this afternoon by John Shaw, who is the director of the Paul Simon Public Policy Institute here at Southern Illinois University in Carbondale, Illinois. We're talking about the January 6th hearings and what's going to be televised. And we'll also get into a little bit about how politicians and governments in general are perhaps changing the way that they communicate with their constituents. John.
Mike, good to see you.
Yeah,
thank you.
So let's get into a little bit about the hearings that are kind of starting. These are not really hearings. What I kind of describe as more of a visual and audio digest of what they have been hearing and listening to for the past 11 months. What are you kind of expecting out of all this?
Well, I mean, I think for the members of the committee, it's a challenge as to how to tell the story of January 6th. I mean, most of us watched parts of it or see clips of it, and there was utter horrors that was unfolding. You know, a year and a half has passed. This committee has been working and talking to thousands of people, you know, reviewing all these documents. So their challenge is how to put this in a format that is new, that's interesting, that tells the story, and frankly, that gets the attention of the American people. That is, you know, as we know, there's a lot of things going on, from gas price to inflation to guns to everything else. You know, how do they focus the country's attention on these events?
And there is a lot going on, and there's a lot of other things that people probably consider as a priority. I know the latest polls are showing that it's the economy, Stu, but that's whatever is on everybody's mind. So it is going to be a challenge to get people to kind of redirect their attention to, you know, what's happening with democracy. And
I think they're really trying to humanize the event. For example, one of the lead witnesses is going to be a Capitol Hill police officer who was seriously hurt during the attack. So the point is, you know, this was not some bloodless, occasion. I mean, it was a violent event in which 7 people were killed, and our democracy, and I don't think this is overstating it, you know, was almost seriously distorted. And so I think, you know, we become inured to these events and to the images. And so this committee is going to try to tell the story in a way that, you know, people who are busy can understand and can grasp. And I know I've seen several of the members of the committee on TV saying, you know, we want to remind people how close this country came to losing its democracy. We don't seem to remember that, but it was pretty darn close because, you know, an election was almost overturned, and who knows what consequences might have flowed, you know, if that had actually happened.
Who is the audience for these hearings? We know that there's probably a fourth of the audience who I would call the MAGA supporters, that you're not going to change their mind one way or the other. But who do you think the audience is for this?
You know, I think that I think they're realistic. I mean, you know, in our fractured era, we're not going to have, you know, tens of millions of people probably watching. It's certainly not from gavel to gavel. But, you know, this is being structured for, you know, our new media age in which, you know, people will be tweeting about it live. There will be all sorts of social media messages. So I think they want to just put it into the bloodstream. Frankly, I don't think that they believe that maybe a lot of the really strong supporters for President Trump will watch this or are interested in it or, you know, even care to think about what happened. I think there might be geared towards suburban Republicans, suburban Democrats, you know, sort of middle America, who probably, you know, is busy in their lives and they've sort of forgotten exactly what happened, and just kind of remind them what did happen and kind of tee up this final report, which will be coming out in September. But I think for Democrats, they also have to be careful not to run the risk of it appearing too partisan, you know, too much of an attempt to kind of, you know, redirect the narrative for the fall election into turf that is more, you know, favorable to them. So I think, you know, there's several Republicans on the committee who are going to, who are interested in this inquiry. So that will give it a bipartisan sense. But these will not be Republicans who will be trying to disrupt the hearings, which sometimes happens.
Yeah, and you kind of bring that up, I guess. Other observations I made, especially from impeachment hearings, for example. I know that when it would come up to Republican lawmakers, they would end up, it wasn't a question, but they would probably spend 5 or 6 minutes on a statement, talking to witnesses, and at the end of that time, I literally sat there and would time it, And I'm like, well, what's the question? Okay, it's not a question. It's really they're injecting their comments into it. So,
well, as someone who I was a reporter for many years in D.C., and I remember I covered the Clinton impeachment. So just to show that this exercise is a bipartisan one, I know that like during the impeachment, Clinton impeachment, the Democrats spent a lot of their time going after, Kenneth Starr, just sort of saying, how come, this has turned into an exploration of a set of issues completely different than what it started out to be. So there is this, I think, a history that, lawmakers from a party tend to protect, the president of their party. And I think, during the impeachment hearings, as you said, I mean, it was, there was no attempt to understand on the part of the Republicans to understand, really what happened first in the Ukraine issue. Then in the second impeachment on the the events of January 6th. So it's a time-worn Washington tactic that the minority party, who wants to distract attention, focuses on procedural issues or interrupts or stages some sort of confrontation that will be kind of shown on the cable networks and so forth.
do you think that will ever change, or is that so ingrained in what you do as a politician? Or do you think, I guess I kind of bringing this up in the new age of media, we're a microwave society, I think is what I've heard. I'll paraphrase that quote. It's like, we want something, straight to the point. But if you listen to a lot of these politicians, they just kind of drone on and on and on. So.
Well, as a reporter in D.C., I mean, the thing that struck me is you could have a really kind of interesting, thoughtful debate on an issue. And then invariably there would be someone on the extreme right who would say something really crazy, someone on the extreme left who'd say something really crazy. And if you watch the news coverage, more times than not, it would be covering the extreme positions because they're oftentimes colorful, theatrical, and it was considered boring to just kind of follow the substance of the.
There's no discussion about gun violence in Chicago without talking about Indiana. Because the violence and the mothers that we have to comfort are losing children due to the guns and the carnage and the lawlessness unleashed by those states.
And then you go on to say sex offenders are truly shunned in our society. I'm just trying to figure out, Judge, is he the victim here or the victims the victims?
I mean, that seems to be, unfortunately, one of the problems I think is affecting our democracy is people have kind of lost the energy to do the hard work of citizenship and actually just follow these issues.
When they talk about the audience, not everybody's going to be watching television. So there's been a great deal of discussion about, well, how is this going to be cut up and displayed within social media, whether it's on, as you mentioned, Twitter, or it could be Instagram or Facebook, all of which have their own niche audiences. Moving forward, how do you present something so in depth on platforms that, you only got 90 seconds of attention span?
And I think that is completely the dilemma of the committee. And I think, so that's where I think it has multiple challenges. One, I mean, I think they're going to try to get the attention of the American people and at least have a fairly compressed message, which is our democracy almost unraveled on January 6, 2021. We came very, very close to having a whole different country. And we're not that far away from something like that happening again. So I think the main thing is they want to focus that alarm and just remind people really how dire it was. I think also, if I were a member of the committee, I would be playing for the history books. I mean, the report that they issue in September is not going to be the final word, but it is going to be the foundation for historians for the next century trying to cover what had happened. And so that's important. That's, on the one hand, you want to have headlines and interesting, compelling stories, but also you want to be factually truthful and accurate. So you have a clear, solid, reliable record that will, endure as the years unfold. Yeah. So those are kind of the twin challenges they face.
I was astounded. 1,000 witnesses, I think, is what they have
deposed. Yeah.
Politicians who you think have really done or are doing a good job with digital media, if you will, how have they adapted to the new medium? How have they been using it? I think AOC, I think, is one example, who I think, a lot of people are critical of her, but she's an example in my mind who has really embraced the technology, embraced the way to reach people.
My name is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. I'm an educator, an organizer, a working-class New Yorker. I've worked with expectant mothers, I've waited tables, and led classrooms.
The same thing could be said about Donald Trump and Twitter, but I just wonder if you have any thoughts on other politicians, other leaders who have figured it out or adapting.
That's a great question. I mean, I think it is a generational thing. I think you have some of the younger lawmakers who really know, that's how you reach people. Back in the day when I was covering it, people were cranking out press releases and hand delivering it to the press galleries, which is, I think we can stipulate, not the best way to deliver messages now. But my impression is it's very much of a generational thing. When you have someone like Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, who is nearing the end of a long career. I think she's 80. I think she has a modest social media presence, but and I'm sure she's being pushed by her aides to have more with one. But and that's maybe the other story. Many of the congressional leaders are in their late 70s, or and so they're the world that they grew up in is not the social media world. Whereas some of the younger members, the backbenchers, are much more adept at social media and much more familiar with it and use it as a much more active tool.
Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, I see him quite active. I follow him on Twitter. And of course, I have to wonder how much of that he's actually putting out himself. I mean, there's a lot of video clips. I'm sure he does have a support staff that generates a lot of that for him.
I don't know this for sure, but I would imagine, he has a social media person who is, he gets clearance from senior staff, but he or she is probably doing the bulk of the work. And
I don't think social media is Mitch McConnell's natural medium of expression. So,
all right, very good. John Shaw, thanks for talking.
My pleasure. It was a lot of fun. Thank you, Mike.